Well, on a recent road trip, I went and collected various equipment, and we looked at all of it except this one, which is a Betacam video recorder. Let's get stuck in. Right, let's have a look at the BetacamSP recorder, UVW1400P. I have a UVW1800P, and I have to confess, I'm not sure what the difference is. Right, first thing, let's power it up. It should say, "Welcome to BetacamSP." That seems a bit slow to do anything. Is there something on the display? I've got it connected up to the superimposed composite video output. Is this button jammed? The set and yes button seems to be all at a funny angle. If it was jammed down, would that stop it from booting? Character on. Aha, well, okay, well that's working. Hours meter works. If I go menu, that's working. Display control. I didn't even touch the yes button and it went ahead and did the reset, so that button is sort of working. Okay, it looks like it's probably trying to function. Let's try and put a tape in. It may just be this display is out. So, BetacamSP tape. That doesn't sound very healthy. Slow to lace up, and the display faded on that. What did it say? Remote is selected. Ah, okay. Local. Rewind. Bit of a head clog. Yes, it's head clogging. So it seems to be working now, apart from the display. Let's try a large size tape. Very slow. What's it doing? It should have changed the spool type. An error's been detected. 211C1. So it should have driven the spool size out. It may just be a lubrication issue with the spool size. Let's go back to small tape again. It seems to be working. Let's try this remote. This is not the same kind of remote as I've got on my other Sony BBW deck. My other one's much heavier than this and has less buttons on it. Do I need to flick it to remote? I don't think so. Let's try fast forward. That's working. Let's try the jog and shuttle. That seems to be working quite well. Freeze. Yeah, I don't think that's for this deck. That all seems to be working okay. It keeps head clogging, but that probably is more to do with the tapes than anything else. So two problems really. That display and the lack of the spool drive for taking large tapes. We'll have to look at that problem in particular. Okay, shall I have a look at this problem with not taking the larger tapes? There's a couple of metal guides which support the reel tables as they go in and out, and I suspect that it's a lubrication issue on those. Well, it could be if we're lucky. So I may have to work on it at the top or underneath. I don't know yet. Let's have a look. Okay, so here we are looking down on it with the cassette carriage removed. Okay, so I've removed the cassette carriage and we're just looking down, and I think these guides here, they can require some lubrication. This is the motor that should drive it. Oh, it did seem rather stuck, didn't it? So if I turn this, hopefully these will go that way. No. Turn it the wrong way. Put the carriage back and just give it a whirl. Okay, I've not put the supporting bracket on the top yet. Oops. Aha. Seems to have got it going again. So I'll just put some drops of oil on those guides and maybe on some of the some grease on these gears to make sure it's not going to stick again. It had probably just been left parked in that small tape position for possibly 10 years or more and just got stuck. It's even possible, of course, that the machine has never seen a big tape before. Right, let's exercise that tape changing a few times. Oh. Is it stuck again? You have to keep doing that, I think, and see if the new grease gets to do its thing. Okay, that seems to have solved that problem. Now I'm detecting a slight whiff of fishiness, and we all know what that means. Capacitor failure. So maybe the front panel has failed, the front panel display has failed because of capacitor failure on the VFD driver. So I'm going to take the front off. Now I do know with these machines, when you take the front off, the buttons tend to fall to pieces. The bits behind these buttons all fall apart. But I'm just going to have to take that risk and take the front off and see if we can get to the display PCB. So I've so far taken out some screws from the side and taken off the control knobs. Anyway, I need to get the front off to fix this damaged button here. There you go. You see the inserts here are staying behind. It's all going to get a bit messy. What am I doing wrong? Okay, note to self. Have this closed when taking the front panel off. The buttons seem to be okay. So, are we looking for capacitors on this panel here? I'm not seeing any. But while we have the front off, we need to work out what was wrong with this yes button here. Seems okay now. I think it had been taken off before and finished up with the plastic there missing the operation button. So when I put it together, I need to be very careful to make sure that that lines up on there and doesn't finish up missing it as it did before. I think it was sitting on the edge. I was thinking I could borrow the front panel or the display driver from a UVW1400 player, because I have one of those not in use at the moment, just to test whether the display is at fault. But I don't think that's going to work because, of course, being a player, it doesn't have the record button, and so there could be firmware differences here. So I may not be able to just drop that one in. But I'm not seeing any capacitors there. I don't think the display driver, I don't think the voltages for the display are generated here. They're probably on one of the other boards. Let's see if we can find that. Looking at the boards, this one's TBC, so it's clearly not that one. This has got a lot of analog electronics, it's not on that one. Similarly, this, at the back we've got I/O connectors. There's a power supply. Well, it's not impossible the fault is in the power supply. I suspect not. And the fishy smell is not coming from there. It's coming more from this area. Now I believe one of the boards here is the VU meter board, but that's working fine. Let's just pull these three boards out. There are some capacitors there, but nothing smells too hideous. A lot of capacitors on this one. This is the meter board. You can see it's got meter 2, it says there, playback level. So I think there's audio and meter on this board. Again, smells okay. And there's some controls here, record equalization I think, and record level. So I think this is not a display driver board. So at this point we're going to go and look at the service manual. Right, the driver IC for the fluorescent display, I just want to check the 5 volts on that. So that's pin 52, should be 5 volts. I'll power it up after I've got my meter probe in the right place. Though it wouldn't actually matter if I slipped and hit 53 because that's also a power pin. So let's power that up and see what we get. I'm sure that'll read 5 volts. There's 5 volts. So the display driver chip is working.
So you know that it's not like...
It's not the chip as unpowered. I mean, that would certainly stop it from working.
You just need to like work your way along.
Well, yeah, you always start with power when something doesn't work.
Yeah.
There's a capacitor over here, a 22 microfarad electrolytic, which is looking at me with a bad attitude, but I don't know where it is on the schematic. What about the voltages for the fluorescent display? Because typically they've got some biggish negative voltages, and I'd found those on the schematic. I found minus 20 something volts for the VU meter display, but haven't found them on this. Ah, look, minus 27 volts goes to the same chip, IC1, on pin 63. So we want to check that one, minus 63 volts. Right, it's a 64 pin chip, so it's the second to last. Need to be very careful I don't slip. There's actually a via right next to it, which is very handy because I can stick my multimeter probe in the via. Well, it's full of solder, but I can still get there. So we're looking for minus 63 volts relative to ground, which I'm picking up here. Okay, wish me luck. Let's see if we get not minus 63, minus 27 on pin 63. Let's power it up. And that is minus 27 because I've got my probe set with positive on the ground. So 27 volts, we're seeing that. Of course, IC1 itself could have failed. Unlikely, though. The fluorescent display could have failed. That's actually slightly more likely. But it's unusual for them to go completely black. I could look for activity on some of the data pins to the display with an oscilloscope. That's a distinct possibility. But I'm starting to think I should probably just swap out the whole board, at least as a test. But before I do that, I really want to check this capacitor because it's just staring at me with a bad attitude. So if it's not too hard to take this board off, I'm going to do that. Sony are lovely. They have big arrows pointing to all the locations where the screws are that you need to undo to take a board off. Yeah. See? This is just so well built.
And if you look at some devices, they're intentionally made so you can't take it apart, like Apple.
But it's a different generation. This equipment was designed in a time when things were supposed to be more fixable, and particularly this is professional equipment, so it's designed to be fixable.
It's quite ironic when you think about it, though, because it's like the world has become more environmentalist, but at the same time that now it's discouraged repairing stuff, which is better for the environment.
So there's a flexi cable there, which is going to make it quite hard to get this board out. 2 flexi cables there. That's a bit awkward. They probably go to this board, the VU meter. I'm sure they do. Maybe if I just take the VU meter off. You know, the one thing I really dislike about the player version of this machine, the UVW1400P, is it doesn't have a display of VU meter. And you could say, well, you don't need it. Well, it is still helpful on a player to be able to see what audio channels you've got going on. So I prefer the recorders because I've got the VU meters. Ah, there you go. I don't have to take those flexi boards off, cables off. Good. Something's stinking here. Scotty, you put your trained nose and tell me where that stink's coming from.
I feel like it's coming from
inside the VU meter.
It smells like it's coming from there.
We'll also check this capacitor here because surface mount electrolytic capacitors are particularly unreliable. Though Sony ones are not as bad as Panasonic, they can still very much fail. Right, this was a 22 microfarad capacitor, but it might have so much circuitry around it that we may not be able to measure the capacitance of it. But let's have a go. I'll use my remote control foot switch, which was a little modification I did on this ESR meter. It says 21 microfarads, ESR 3 ohms, so that's within spec. That is not the component that has caused this machine to not work. Let's see if we can get into this module, because it stinks.
Yeah.
It may have a DC to DC converter in here that's generating the negative voltages. The negative voltages are there, so this might be an aside. This might not be the cause for it not working, but it still has to be investigated. Sometimes you end up fixing faults, but not the fault.
If it's a symptom, not the cause.
No, you end up fixing a fault, but not the fault that's causing the immediate problem. They are almost certainly gone, those capacitors.
So whether that's the main problem or not, you want to replace those.
Well, I think they've oozed goo all over the board.
That's not good.
That's not looking very pretty. Let's look at that under the microscope. Right, so these transistors here are looking a little bit sad because they've been got at by goo from those 47 microfarad 35 volt capacitors. That capacitor there is a 47 microfarad 35 volt, and it's gooified the transistors nearby, which may have caused actual damage or just be upsetting the conditions. So I need to replace all those capacitors. It's hardly even worth testing them. I mean, I will for a laugh, but they are clearly toast. There's a possibility. There's a distinct possibility that's the cause of the problem.
But it could also just be another problem.
It could be another problem. But let's have a look at that 47 microfarad capacitor that's obviously gone gooey. It says open circuit. Whereas this one probably is okay. 16 microfarad over 20 ohms ESR. So let me show you that. Hope my viewer can see the display. So this capacitor, the lower one, C5, is, I had a reading out of it just now, 16 microfarad over 20 ohms ESR. The one that's clearly gooped up,
I doubt that one
is reading nonsense.
Yeah, that probably makes sense.
This one here, 16 over 20 ohms. I mean, they are all toast, aren't they? So looking at these capacitors, there's 47 microfarad 35 volt capacitors and some transistors in the middle that are looking very sad. So I think we need to replace the capacitors and put this whole thing through the ultrasonic cleaning tank. Now, I've never put a fluorescent display in a cleaning tank before. That does worry me a little bit, but I don't think I've got much choice. Now, I could either fit surface mount capacitors in here or through plates, and I think there's enough room to fit through plate ones. So my first challenge is to get these horrible capacitors off, and then I'll fit replacements on there. I had started by using the tweezers, but actually damaged a pad with that, so that just made more work for myself. I found the best way to get rid of the capacitors in this case is to rotate the top part of the capacitor so that it snaps off where it connects to the lower part of the connectors on the bottom of the capacitor. And then once it's broken cleanly off there, I just had to desolder the fragment at the bottom of the capacitor and then clean up the PCB, and that gave a really good result without damaging anything. So I have replaced these 5 capacitors. I had 4 of one type, unfortunately 1 of another, but best I could do is what I had in stock. And the other thing I've done is everywhere I've seen, for example here, there's a bit of track which has got rather eaten away by capacitor goo. I've gone through and tested those tracks, and there's some other parts as well, such as a bit here, and I've tested that all of those are intact. There's that one. So I'm confident that all the top tracks are good. What I can't test is whether there's any damage to the wires here, because unfortunately to test them I'd have to take the display off, and I really don't want to have to go into battle with all those connectors. Contacts, I have to desolder all that. There's a risk of damage. So I think I'm going to say that that's as good as I can go for the time being. I know it seems weird that this would have any bearing on the other display, but it would appear that that's the way it's built, that this contains the power supply that drives both displays. And this is actually built by Futaba, who doubtless made the displays as well. Now this has been through the ultrasonic tank with cleaner, and then I washed it, and I've dried it thoroughly. Of course, the big thing here, there's a transformer. Really want to make sure there's no water trapped in that. So I dried it first with compressed air, and then put it into a 50 Celsius oven I normally use for baking tapes. Put it in there for some hours. So I think we're at a position where we could try this. I just need to put the lid back on the top. So that goes on there. I hope it still fits despite all my components. No, it doesn't. That capacitor cannot stay there. It's colliding with this piece of metalwork. So small adjustment required. Okay, adjusted that so I can reassemble this. Right, Scott, we're ready to try it. So that's the isolation transformer. That's the on-off switch, which I think that's on, I think. I genuinely haven't tried it. So I've replaced the capacitors in here and cleaned up some of the muck on the circuit board, but has it done any damage? And does that drive this? I think it does. So it could either be fixed, or better, or worse, or blow up if I've made a stupid mistake. So switch on the isolation transformer first, and then switch that switch on, and if there's a big bang, be ready to switch off and hurry. Go. That's work. Oh no, that display came on. I think that's brighter. I think that display's brighter. But no, this one still didn't come up. Oh, that's disappointing, isn't it, Scott? All that work and it didn't help. Oh well, thanks for your help, Scott. Scott, I think I read a slightly strange voltage on this capacitor, and I'm a little bit worried about it. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you can, is to switch that on.
Okay.
While I'm reading the voltage. It's supposed to be minus 24 volts. So if you can switch it on for me and read the voltage on that meter. Go on in. Switch it off! Did you see that? It was minus 80 volts. The 24 volt line is minus 80 volts. Oh, that's really bad. Because that's only 33 volt rated capacitor. 35 volt, I should say. With that voltage on it, it could explode. So, that's quite bad news. I know that display is still working, and that one's not. But I don't think I can use it.
Why don't you use it with the one display? It's no worse than it was before.
Because of this high voltage. Even if I unplug this display from here, because I can unplug the cables, there's somewhere in there that's sitting at minus 80 volts that's supposed to be minus 24, and it's likely to explode one of the capacitors in there. It's a fire risk. So what's probably happened is when I tried to repair this unit, or as a result of the damage of capacitors in there, it's damaged one of the tracks or vias in there, and it's lost regulation, or it could be one of the transistors has been destroyed. It's lost regulation of that minus 24 volts. So now we've got this horrible voltage on it. I can't use this machine at all. Oh, what a disaster. I suppose if anybody's got a scrap one of these with a working pair of display panels and they'd like to send me it, I'll change capacitors in the Futaba display driver circuit in the top part here, because if they failed on this, they've likely failed on most of them, and then I would have a good working one. But as it stands, I'm afraid I can't use the machine at all. Scrap as it stands.
What are you going to do with it?
Stuff it in the loft, I think, Scott. Okay, not everything goes to plan. If I can get hold of a replacement pair of display panels for that machine, then I can fix it later.
Dad,
In the meantime,
the soap machine's broken.
Okay, well, I've always got something to fix, so I'll see you shortly. Bye for now.